Hello, Yes 6. We are going to be finishing off chapter 5 today. So we started chapter 5, which, if you remember, was called Dulce Domum, which meant sweet home. And we ended in Mole's little house. And they were looking round, seeing all the little things that Mole had in his garden, and little touches that he'd made to make his house really homely and sweet. And now we're going to find out what they get up to now that they're there. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects so dear to him, and he hurried Rat through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance round his old home. He saw the dust lying thick on everything, saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long-neglected house and its narrow, meagre dimensions, its worn and shabby contents, and collapsed again on a hall chair, his nose in his paws. "Oh, Ratty!" he cried dismally. "Why ever did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this, when you might have been at the river bank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire with all your own nice things about you?" The Rat paid no heed to this doleful self-reproaches. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little house this is," he called out cheerily. "So compact, so well planned, everything here and everything in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want to do is have a good fire. I'll see to that. I always know where to find things. So, this is your parlour. Splendid. Your own idea, those little sleeping bunks in the walls. Capital! Now, I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole. You'll find one in the drawer in the kitchen table, and try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap." Encouraged by his inspiriting companion, the Mole roused himself and dusted and polished with energy and heartiness, while the Rat, running to and fro with armfuls of fuel, soon had a cheerful blaze roaring up the chimney. He hailed the Mole to come and warm himself, but Mole promptly had another fit of the blues, dropping down on the couch in dark despair and buried his face in his duster. "Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper, you poor, cold, hungry, weary animal? I've nothing to give you, nothing, not a crumb." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the Rat reproachfully. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere in the neighbourhood. Rouse yourself, pull yourself together, and come with me and forage." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so very depressing after all, though of course it might have been a bit better. A tin of sardines, a box of Captain's biscuits, nearly full, and a German sausage encased in a silver paper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the Rat, as he arranged the table. "I know some animals who would give their ears to be sitting down to a supper like this tonight." "No bread," groaned the Mole dolorously. "No butter, no pâté de foie gras, no champagne," continued the Rat, grinning. "And that reminds me, what's that little door at the end of the passage?" "Your cellar, of course. Every luxury in this house. Just you wait a minute." He made for the cellar door and presently reappeared, somewhat dusty, with a bottle of beer in each paw and another under each arm. "Self-indulgent beggar you seem to be, Mole," he observed. "Deny yourself nothing. This is really the jolliest little place I ever was in. Now, wherever did you pick up those prints? Make the place so home-like they do. No wonder you're so fond of it, Mole. Tell us all about it, and how you came to make it what it is." Then, while the Rat busied himself fetching plates and knives and forks and mustard which he mixed in an egg cup, the Mole, his bosom still heaving with the stress of his recent emotion, related, somewhat shyly at first, but with more freedom as he warmed to the subject, how this was planned and how that was thought out, and how this got through a windfall from an aunt, and that this was a wonderful find and a bargain, and this thing was bought out of laborious savings and a certain amount of going without. With his spirits finally quite restored, he must needs go and caress his possessions, and take a lamp and show off their points to his visitor. Quite forgetful of the supper they both so much needed, Rat, who was desperately hungry, but strove to conceal it, nodding seriously, examining with a puckered brow, and saying, "Oh, wonderful and most remarkable," at intervals, when the chance for an observation was given him. At last the rat succeeded in decoying him to the table, and had just got seriously to work with the sardine opener, when sounds were heard from the forecourt without, sounds like the scuffling of small feet in the gravel and a confused murmur of tiny voices, while broken sentences reached them. "Now, all in line. Hold that lantern up a bit, Tommy. Clear your throats first. No coughing after I say 1, 2, 3. Oh, where's young Bill? Oh, here, come on, do. We're all waiting." "What's up?" inquired the rat, pausing in his labours. "I think it might be the field mice," replied the mole, with a touch of pride in his manner. "They go around singing carols regularly at this time of year. They're quite an institution in these parts. And they never pass me over. They come to Mole End last of all, and I used to give them hot drinks and supper too when I could afford it. It will be like old times to hear them again." "Let's have a look at them then," cried the rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was quite a pretty sight, and a seasonable one, that met their eyes when they flung open the door. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a horn lantern, some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red-worsted comforters round their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jiggling for warmth. Their bright, beady eyes, they glanced shyly at each other, sniggering a little, sniffing and applying coat sleeves in a good deal. As the door opened, one of the elder ones that carried the lantern was saying, "Now, 1, 2, 3. And forthwith their shrill little voices uprose on the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in the fields that they were fallow and held by frost, or when snowbound in chimney corners and handed down to be sung in the merry street lamp to lamplit windows at Yule-time. "Villagers all, this frosty tide, let your doors swing open wide. Though wind may follow and snow beside, yet draw us in by your fire to bide. Joy shall be yours in the morning. Here we stand in the cold and sleet, blowing fingers and stamping feet, come from far away you to greet, you by the fire and we in the street, bidding you joy in this morning. For ere one half of the night was gone, sudden a star that led us on, raining bliss and benison, bliss tomorrow and more anon, joy for every morning. Goodman Joseph toiled through the snow, saw the star o'er the stable low. Mary she might not further go, welcome thatch and litter below. Joy was hers in the morning. And when they heard the angels tell, who were the first to cry Noel, animals all as it befell, in the stable where they did dwell, joy shall be theirs in the morning. Their voices ceased. The singers, bashful but still smiling, exchanged sidelong glances, and silence succeeded, but only for a moment. Then, from up above and far away, down the tunnel from which they so lately travelled, was borne to their ears in a faint musical hum the sound of distant bells ringing a joyful and clangorous peal. "Very well sung, boys," cried the rat heartily. "And now, come in, all of you, and warm yourselves by the fire and have something hot." "Yes, come in, field mice," cried the mole eagerly. "This is quite like old times. Shut the door after you. Pull up that settle to the fire. Now you're just... Wait a minute. Oh, Ratty!" he cried in despair, plumping down on a seat, with tears impending. "Whatever are we doing? We've nothing to give them." "Oh, leave that to me," said the masterful rat. "Here, you with the lantern, come this way. I want to talk to you. Now, tell me, are there any shops open at this hour of night?" "Why, certainly, sir," replied the first field mouse respectfully. "At this time of the year, our shops keep open to all sorts of hours." "Then look here," said the rat. "You go off at once, you and your lantern, and you get me—" There was much muttered conversation which ensued, and the mole only heard bits of it, such as, "Fresh mind? No. A pound of that will do. See that you get Buggins's, for I won't have any other. No, only the best. Well, if you can't get that, then try somewhere else. Well, yes, of course. Homemade, no tin stuff. Well, then do. Do the best you can. Finally, there was a chink of a coin passing from one paw to another. The field mouse was provided with an ample basket for his purchases, and off he hurried, he and his lantern. The rest of the field mice perched in a row on the settle, their small legs swinging, gave themselves up to the enjoyment of the fire and toasted their chilblains till they tingled, while the mole, failing to draw them into the easy conversation, plunged into family history and made each of them recite their names of his numerous brothers, who were too young, it appeared, to be allowed to go out a-carolling this year, but looked forward very shortly to winning the parental consent. The rat, meanwhile, was busy examining the label on one of the beer bottles. "I perceive this to be old Burton," he remarked approvingly. "Sensible mole, the very thing. Now we shall be able to mull some ale. Get the things ready, Mole, while I draw the corks." It did not take long to prepare the brew and thrust the tin heater well into the red heart of the fire, and soon every field mouse was sipping and coughing and choking, for a little mulled ale goes a long way, and wiping his eyes and laughing and forgetting he had ever been cold in all of his life. "They act plays too, these fellows," the mole explained to the rat. "Make them up by themselves and act them afterwards. And very well they do too. They gave us a capital one last year about a field mouse who was captured at sea by the Barbary corsair, and when he escaped and got home again, his lady love had gone into a convent. Here, you were in it, I remember. Get up and recite a bit." The field mouse got up on his legs, giggled shyly, looked around the room and remained absolutely tongue-tied. His comrades cheered him on, Mole coaxed and encouraged him, and the rat went so far as to take him by the shoulders and shake him, but nothing could overcome his stage fright. They were all busily engaged on him like watermen applying the Royal Humane Society's regulation to a case of long submersion. When the latch clicked, the door opened, and the field mouse with the lantern reappeared, staggering under the weight of his basket. There was no more talk of play acting once the real and solid contents of the basket had been tumbled out onto the table. Under the generalship of the rat, everybody was set to do something or fetch something. In a very few minutes supper was ready, and Mole, as he took to the head of the table in a sort of dream, saw a lately barren board set thick with savoury comforts, saw his little friends' faces brighten and beam as they fell to without delay, and then let himself loose, for he himself was famished indeed, on the provender so many provided, thinking what a happy homecoming this had turned out to be after all. As they ate, they talked of old times, and the field mice gave him the local gossip up to date and answered as many questions as they could. The rat said little or nothing, only taking care that each guest had what he wanted and plenty of it, and that Mole had no trouble or anxiety about anything. They clattered off at last, very grateful and showering wishes of the season, with their jacket pockets stuffed with remembrances for the small brothers and sisters at home. When the door had closed on the last of them and the chink of the lanterns had died away, Mole and Rat kicked the fire up and drew their chairs in, brewed themselves the last of the nightcap of mulled ale, and discussed the events of the long day. At last the Rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, old chap, I'm ready to drop. Sleepy is simply not the word. That's your own bunk over there, that side. Very well then, I'll take this one. What a ripping little house this is. Everything is so handy." He clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well up in the blankets, and slumber gathered him forthwith, as a swathe of barley is folded into the arms of a reaping machine. The weary Mole also was glad to turn in without delay, and soon had his head on his pillow in great joy and contentment. But ere he closed his eyes, he let them wander around his old room, mellow in the glow of the firelight that played or rested on familiar and friendly things, which had long been unconsciously a part of him, and now smilingly received him back. He was now in just the frame of mind that the tactful Rat had quietly worked to bring him into. He saw clearly how plain and simple, how narrow even it was, but clearly too how much it all meant to him, and the special value of some such anchorage in one's existence. He did not at all want to abandon his new life and its splendid spaces, to turn his back on the sun and air and all that they offered him, and creep home and stay there. The upper world was all too strong, and it called to him even still, even down there, and he knew he must return to the larger stage. But it was good to think that he had come back to this place which was all his own, these things which were so glad to see him, and could always be counted upon for the same simple welcome. There we go. So that is the end of chapter 5. It sounds like Moore had a really lovely time at home. And again, this is something that I really love about this book, is that these characters are so friendly towards one another and support one another, and that they love their adventures and exploring, but they always find comfort in their homes and houses and the things that are important to them. We will continue with the story when we return to school, starting back on chapter 6. And chapter 6 is entitled Mr. Toad. So we're going to have a few more adventures with Mr. Toad and the other characters, of course, when we go back to school next week.